Follow the rubles. Let's play hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews in Washington. President Trump marked the anniversary of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's appointment with a tweet this morning proclaiming his innocence. Congratulations, America. We are now into the second year of the greatest witch hunt in American history, and there is still no collusion and no obstruction. He went on to claim that despite the disgusting, illegal, and unwarranted witch hunt, we have had the most successful first 17-month administration in U.S. history, by far. Sorry to the fake news media and haters, but that's the way it is. Well, despite the president's repeated assertion that there's nothing new, new reporting continues to raise questions about whether Trump and his allies collaborate with Russia during the election. We're now discovering how Donald Trump and his associates were pursuing a major business deal in Russia while he was running for president. In other words, Trump was chasing Russian rubles at the same time he was seeking American votes. Today, BuzzFeed News revealed that Michael Cohen's effort to develop a Trump Tower over in Moscow during the election year went on far longer than he publicly acknowledged, extending into the spring of 2016. Most damning is that, quote, even before the appointment of Mueller as special counsel in May of 2017, FBI agents investigating Russia's interference in the election learned that Michael Cohen was in frequent contact with foreign individuals about Trump Moscow, and that some of these individuals had knowledge of or played a role in 2016 election meddling. It's all connected, according to two FBI agents. In May of 2016, Michael Cohen, along with his partner Felix Sater, were actively planning to send Trump to Moscow. Quote, they discussed when in the presidential campaign Trump should take the extraordinary step of flying to a country at odds with the United States in order to negotiate a major business deal. Well, Sater told BuzzFeed that Cohen was also prepared to make a separate trip to Moscow, and that planning for that trip continued through June of 2016, when Cohen suddenly demurred. NBC News has not independently verified BuzzFeed's reporting yet. Joining me right now is former Watergate prosecutor Jill Wine-Banks and MSNBC legal analyst Eugene Robinson, is a columnist for The Washington Post and an MSNBC political analyst, and Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois sits on the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman Quigley, I want to start with you, the elected official, and here we are with more evidence, thanks to BuzzFeed, that there was ongoing business dealing by Trump's associates, by his close fixer, lawyer, Michael Cohen, and Felix Sater, his associate, all on behalf of Trump. In other words, he was literally chasing money over in Moscow at the same time he was chasing votes here at home. What's your thought about that?
Yeah, he testified before our committee last October. In light of the information you have talked about in other documents we've received, he really should come back. Well, but oh wait, they shut the investigation down. Obviously, a great concern is the letter of intent signed during the campaign by candidate Trump about Trump Tower Moscow. Information that Mr. Cohen, perhaps other than the president alone, can give us more information on.
Let me go to Jill on this. Jill, it seems to me that there's lots to pursue here, and the idea that this probe by Robert Mueller should end now because of some artificial anniversary celebration is insane. We are only learning now these stories about the way in which Trump's people are out there trying to make a buck over in Moscow using his prestige as a candidate. We're going to develop that tonight. But apparently they were using the fact that he was now a big American political big shot as well as a tycoon as a way of greasing the skids for his investments in Moscow.
It's an unusual situation where you have a candidate for president of the United States as concerned, if not more concerned, about his personal wealth and his financial dealings during the time of the campaign, and to be that involved in trying to do business with Russia at the same time as a lot of secret meetings are happening with Russia, and where the financing was going to come from sanctioned banks. And they're having discussions about whether sanctions should be lifted. It really is a very smelly situation. It clearly needs much more investigation, and a year is not a lot of time for the kind of sophisticated crimes that are involved here. It needs more time. Mueller must continue.
Gina, I get the sense more often that Trump has limited knowledge, but he has a lot in certain areas. He knows a lot about real estate, obviously, and that kind of money making. He has people out there on his behalf who don't really have any grasp of what horrors are waiting for them over in Russia. The stuff going on over there where they shoot you, they don't enforce, they enforce contracts or ignore contracts with gunpoint over there. And the idea he had people over there saying, let's do business for Trump Tower, and those people he's doing business with, this is Michael Cohen, and the other fellow, Felix Sater, they're dealing with people who are at the same time involved with trying to screw with our democracy.
Yeah, well, let's, two things about what I assume to be Donald Trump's state of mind during this. First, I assume that he looked at, had been looking at Russia for a number of years, since Miss Universe and even before, as a big pot of money that he ought to get his piece of. And so he was going to do Trump Tower, and you had these oligarchs, and they spent money like water, and so why didn't he get some of that? So that's one mindset. The other mindset is that for much of the campaign, until fairly late, part of his thinking, part of his mentality had to be that this was really just the greatest marketing campaign in history, right? Because the odds were long that he was actually going to get across the finish line.
And we all thought that,
until he did at some point probably convince himself that, yes, I can do this. But meanwhile, a part of him had to be thinking, this is just raising my profile, and so why shouldn't he pursue this deal in Moscow if he was going to get his chunk of that money?
Mr. Quigley, Congressman, at the local level, we all know that some people run for office knowing they're probably going to lose, but they've got a law license out there and they want to make some money. They got the shingle out, so it doesn't hurt them a bit when you lose a race for the House or something like that. Is it possible that we have a guy running for president whose secondary purpose is to be elected president? That's the long shot part. But the short money, the short deals, of course, to make a stab at a big business investment that'll pay off down the road in Moscow. The problem is he's got all this going on and saying at the same time, don't look at this. Don't look at this. Close down the shop. What do you think the chances are that Mueller would ever shut down his shop? What do you know about that? Or is he going to go this all the distance?
Yeah, I don't think Mueller stops by himself. Speaker Ryan said today that the Mueller investigation should be allowed to continue on its own. Speaker Ryan can make sure that happens. He needs to put a bill on the floor to protect the Mueller investigation. Mueller won't stop this until he's done.
Well, BuzzFeed's reporting also shows a nexus now between Trump's political campaign and, as I said, his business interests. During a meeting with an intermediate to California powerful Russians, Felix Sater, that's one of his associates, used Trump's public praise of Putin to entice wealthy Russians to invest in the Moscow development. Quote, Trump had recently praised Putin on TV, so Sater, that's his associate, emailed Cohen, Michael Cohen, saying, get me a clip. Get me the clip of Trump praising Putin so they can help grease the skids for this business deal. Well, during the campaign, Trump's effusive praise of Putin confounded many observers. Let's take a look at some of the things he said that were useful to business.
I think I'd get along very well with Vladimir Putin. I just think so.
I would get along with Putin.
I've dealt with Russia.
I think Putin's been a very strong leader for Russia, but he's been a lot stronger than our leader, that I can tell you.
Putin said Donald Trump is a genius. He's going to be the next great leader of the United States. Putin did call me a genius.
My attitude, when people like me, I like them. Even Putin.
I'm going to disavow a statement when somebody calls me a genius. I'm not disavowing anything.
He does have an 82% approval rating, according to the different pollsters.
Does he actually believe this malarkey? I'm talking like Joe Biden now, malarkey. Jill, I mean, the idea that he believes Russian polling, there aren't many options on that ballot over there. And the idea that, anyway, we know what the story is. That's not exactly democratic the way we know. But what do you make of this guy who seems to be constantly entwining, and his people are doing what he wants them to do, selling him as a business deal maker because he's running for president, selling him as a Russian business associate because he's saying nice things about the guy over there who has to approve all the deals over there. What does this do to it? Is this all legal to do what he was doing?
Well, it may be legal, even if it is immoral, but I also think that he was thinking that this would increase the licensing fees. They were having trouble getting developers willing to pay just to put Trump's name on a building. And the thought was, and it was expressed in the emails between Cohen and Sater, that when he became this very public figure in America, that they would be willing to pay more to put his name on a building. So he was clearly using his campaign to move forward, and he was using it. Now, at what point, if any, the campaign decided that they could use the relationships with Russia to do something other than a real estate deal and to cooperate with Russia for possible help in winning the election, that seems to be the question that Mueller is focusing on now.
Well, as we know, Trump was aware of the negotiations for a Trump Tower in Moscow because he signed a letter of intent with a developer that Felix Sater brought to the table in October of 2015. However, just a month later, Trump professed not to know Sater, even though Sater was coordinating the deal on his behalf. As Trump said to the Associated Press, Felix Sater, boy, I have to even think about it. I'm not that familiar with him. Judge, I'm sorry, Joe. What do you mean? I'm not that familiar with him. That's what you admit when you say you know somebody. I mean,
you're right. You're right. And of course, he may be very sorry he said that because it apparently really angered Sater, who now seems to be cooperating with Mueller. And he may be doing that because exactly of that point was that Trump said, I don't even know him. So he may have made a mistake in underestimating what the connections that Sater had were, and he seems to have had some pretty high-up connections. So this may not have been a good thing for him.
Let me go back to my rant, if you will, because I have a few rants. Once Dick Cheney got us into a bad war. I don't mind having a few rants. One of them is this Russia thing, this Russophilia. You and I have known politicians all our life, cover them, never realized they had close Russian friends or associates because they didn't have any.
No, they didn't.
This guy, they keep coming out of the woodwork. All of a sudden, Felix Sater is the big top of the news here tonight, a name that hadn't picked up before, along with Papadopoulos and all these other guys, Gates, Rick Gates, and Manafort, and Roger Stone, and the endless list of these Cato Kalin characters that associates, and their only role seems to be to tie this guy to Russia.
So, look, you know, I know people who were correspondents in Moscow who developed a sort of deep relationship with the culture and the people of Russia and the history, as opposed to the government and all that, which has been oppressive since there was Russia. But that's not what this is about. This is about the money, I think. I really do, and about the, you know, when the Soviet Union ended. This new kleptocracy, these oligarchs managed to divvy up this incredible bounty, which they dole out. It's like
and he wanted a big handful. He wanted a big.
He wanted a big handful of jelly beans.
Well, in his tweet storm this morning, President Trump also cited an allegation that appeared in the National Review magazine last week, tweeting, "Wow. Word seems to be coming out that the Obama FBI spied on the Trump campaign with an embedded informant. If so, this is bigger than Watergate." Anyway, the president also appears to be referencing a new detail about the investigation that appeared last night in the New York Times. The Times reports that at the start of the FBI's investigation of Trump's campaign, at least one government informant met several times with Mr. Carter Page and Mr. George Stephanopoulos. Current and former officials said that has become a politically contentious point, with Mr. Trump's allies questioning whether the FBI was spying on the Trump campaign or tried to entrap campaign officials. Well, Rudy Giuliani today seized on that reporting, making clear that the Trump legal team would fight the investigation by destroying its credibility, not on the merits of the evidence itself. Here we go.
First of all, we're going to have to look into as a result of the Times article. And thank you, New York Times. They usually don't help us. In this case, I think we're going to have to look into whether we can challenge the legitimacy of the entire investigation.
In other words, Joe, you can't have an investigation without investigators. I don't understand what they're charging here, that the FBI is trying to find out the Russian connection, and they're being called spies. That's the nice word that Giuliani's using. Your thoughts?
This is an investigation by investigators. They are not spies. If you are under investigation, the FBI sends out people to interview people about you, to find out what you've been doing. That's a legitimate investigation. And we know that there was evidence against both Page and Papadopoulos. The Australians are quite proud of the fact that their foreign official notified American officials that Papadopoulos had said, "I've been meeting with the Russians and they have dirt on Hillary." And so They had a legitimate reason to investigate these people for possible collusion with the Russians, and that's what they were doing.
You know, the oddity of using the word spies, everybody who's ever been in the Peace Corps, everybody who's ever worked in the United States government at any significant level, has had a full field investigation by the FBI. It's part of the rite of passage, if you will. We never thought of those people that went around to talk to our parents and our neighbors as spies. They were government officials checking us out to see if we're okay for these jobs. Congressman, thank you very much. Congressman Mike Quigley of Illinois. Thank you, Jill Wine-Banks and Eugene Robinson, of course. Coming up, what's Rudy Giuliani's game right now? He says Trump would love to testify. Of course he wouldn't. And Rudy's defending the Trump campaign by saying if they get dirt on the Russians, if they did, they would have used it. But they were doing it. Think of how many times Trump said WikiLeaks in the campaign trail. He's all about using it. Plus, besides Stormy Daniels, Donald Trump may have had paid hush money to at least 2 additional women in such circumstances. Michael Avenatti dropped that bombshell today. News keeps piling up. And Trump seems to want to fight the Russian investigation in the court of public opinion, don't you think? But Trump's latest over-the-top tweet about how well he's doing comes just as a former top member of the cabinet is taking a swipe at his ex-boss, recently ex-boss, and calling out the country's crisis of ethics and integrity. That's Tillerson talking. Finally, let me finish tonight with Trump Watch. He will not like tonight. This is Hardball, where the action is. We've got late-breaking news tonight related to Donald Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. NBC News has confirmed now that Manafort's former son-in-law, a real estate developer out in California, has pleaded guilty in a separate criminal investigation in that state. He's agreed to cooperate with investigators as part of his plea agreement, which means he could be used by Special Counsel Mueller to put additional pressure on Manafort in connection with the Russia probe. And we'll be right back. Welcome back to Hardball. Rudy Giuliani continued his media blitz over the last 24 hours with a revamped defense of his client, Donald Trump. He said Special Counsel Robert Mueller acknowledged he didn't have the power to indict a sitting president. That's what he said. Giuliani also argued collecting opposition research, even from Russia, isn't illegal. And today, Giuliani told Fox News that President Trump would welcome the opportunity to sit down with Mueller's team.
You got to understand the president wants to testify. He wants to give his side of the case, which he believes is the truthful. If they had an open mind, we would be inclined maybe to let our client do what he wants to do.
Maybe. Giuliani told NBC News, the chief counsel, the special counsel's office is now, quote, engaging us on several points where we could reach an agreement. So he's playing it both ways. He said details about the conversations were confidential, but added, the last day or so, it's been more productive than in the last 2 weeks. This is like negotiating with North Korea. From where I'm joined by Kimberly Atkins, chief Washington reporter for the Boston Herald, and Sam Stein's politics editor for the Daily Beast. Both are MSNBC contributors. So I have a theory, but what's yours? Why is Giuliani so mouthy? Why is he all over the press? He's like the full Ginsburg. He does everybody. He starts at dawn. He's still talking late at night with Hannity. Why is he drawing attention to the Stormy Daniels part of this thing, first of all? Because that's what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's trying to act as President Trump's mouthpiece on this issue, both to keep the president calm and ostensibly the idea was to let the president focus on North Korea and other important things, right? The president's not doing that. He's also tweeting and talking about this, too.
From dawn.
Exactly, from his Twitter account. But he's trying to be the offensive person, trying to be the lead discreditor of the Mueller investigation, the signal to Republicans that they're looking past this, they're ready to discredit any sort of report that comes out.
Because they want to see what's coming?
I think so. They want to get out ahead of whatever is coming. They want to do their messaging. I mean, on the point about the indictment, look, we only know Giuliani's side because Mueller's not talking. So I think you should take that with a little grain of salt.
He's not a perfect messenger.
He is not. He's not. He's certainly not acting as a lawyer, being that he's given legal advice that isn't.
Well, I don't think he's actually playing the role of lawyer here.
Well, he's not.
Rudy was brought onto this team for a PR purpose. Trump did not like the fact that his old legal team was not hitting back in TV, which is Trump's favorite medium, of course. And so Rudy was brought on to do ostensibly that. And one of the things he's doing with the Stormy Daniels thing is just get out in front of the news of the personal financial disclosure, which was coming out, which would reveal the payments. But what he's doing with Mueller is, I think, trying to soften up the public perception of the Trump status, which is we are trying.
if they expect the worst, if they expect that this iceberg of information that Mueller's been able to accumulate could be really damaging, even with people who are pro-Trump, what are they doing now to prepare for that?
I think, first and foremost, they're trying to message around the idea of whether or not he will do an interview. So what Rudy goes out there and he says, you know, we're open to the possibility. We just want them to narrow it a little bit. What he's really saying is we're trying to game the public.
Process.
Yes.
When everybody's talking about process, here's my thought. I'll run it by both of you. I think this is an old game in politics. Change the question. If the question is guilt or not, they're probably going to lose because I think Mueller's going to get something on all the associates. Look, he's got 19 indictments. He's going to get Manafort. He's going to all these guys involved. He's got Michael Cohen over there cutting deals. There's so much stuff that it's a lot of obstruction of justice material. They don't want the question to be guilty or not guilty. They don't want the country to be a jury. They want to ask the country, whose side you on?
Yes.
Whose side you on? I think that's what Giuliani's all about because he's a pal.
And let me just make
this.
Sure.
I think it's New York City, or Boston. Politics. You just people, which side are you on? Are you with the labor unions or with the business? Are you the Democrats, Republicans, the left or the right? Black or white? And get on your site and fight it.
And he's been pegging this as an attack on America. It's difficult for him to do his job. It's bad for America. It's bad. He's painting this as anti-patriotic versus patriotic, the president trying to do his job. So I think that you're right.
That's what they did with Nixon.
I would take it one step further, which is they have moved the goalposts significantly. At first it was we didn't talk to the Russians. Then it was, well, the campaign didn't talk to the Russians. Then it was, well, the campaign might have, but we didn't collude with the Russians. And then it was, well, collusion is really when you do X, Y, and Z.
Mueller sucks.
Or that.
He just says, I don't care what he finds out, he sucks.
I had a bunch of top Democrats say to me something very profound, which is, had the news of the Trump Tower meeting with Russian officials dropped tomorrow or a week from now, it would be treated as an utter and complete bombshell. It would be treated as proof of collusion. It would be a game over smoking gun. But it dropped. It dropped many months ago, and we sort of have grown numb to it in a way that we don't actually recognize the significance of the moment, which was a hostile government offered dirt on a political opponent, and the Trump campaign said yes.
Anyway, meanwhile, in a separate Fox News interview last night, Giuliani was asked about that infamous June 26 Trump Tower meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and the Russians promising dirt on Hillary Clinton. Giuliani argued that there's nothing wrong with taking opposition research, even from Russia. Here's Giuliani. Let's listen.
When I ran against them, they were looking for dirt on me every day. I mean, that's what you do. Maybe you shouldn't, but you do it. Nothing illegal about that. And even if it comes from a Russian or a German or an American, it doesn't matter. And they never used it. It's the main thing. They never used it. They rejected it. If there was collusion with the Russians, they would have used it.
Kimberly, I don't want into the law. None of us are lawyers here, I don't think. But the question is,
I am a lawyer, and he said about 4 different things that were wrong.
Go with it. Because the first one I heard was you can't take stuff from foreign government. You're not allowed to make a campaign contribution from another country.
Either money or in kind. You cannot take things from other countries to help you in an election. So that's wrong, point number one. Saying that we took it but didn't use it is also not a defense to any sort of crime. I mean, it's just nothing that he's saying is legally
Receiving stolen property is illegal.
I think he made an actual...
What are the other ones? I want to hear you guys.
There's two more.
It was so many of them, so rapid fire.
I think he made a potentially damaging admission in that clip, which was he defined what collusion is for the Trump legal team. You have to use the material you were given. That is collusion, he said. Now, if Mueller were to go out and find that, for instance, Roger Stone used material from, say, WikiLeaks, that would meet now the Trump legal team's definition of collusion. And there would be nothing that Rudy Giuliani or Emmett Flood or Donald Trump could say to take back the definition that Rudy Giuliani just said.
Do we know if Trump used something that Stone picked up from WikiLeaks?
We don't, but it's possible Mueller has.
But at the end of the day, it is the definition by federal prosecutors that counts. It's not Giuliani's definition or anybody else's. It's whether they find something that ties up Trump or anybody in his team.
Do you get a sense that Rudy Giuliani's not up to date on the law? Or any law? Or
no,
he's not the kind of...
I haven't picked that one up.
He doesn't seem like that. He seems more like a talker lawyer than one who looks at books once in a while.
And I think he's basically admitted that he's leaving a lot of the technicalities to the other people on the legal team, and he's out there throwing the punches. And that's fine. That fair enough. But, you know, if that's part of your legal strategy, it says a lot about your legal strategy.
I think the part of the strategy is giving a message that the president wants him to give, saying what the president wants
He says it as if it's the truth. Isn't it amazing the way he says it? He says things which are arguable, as if that's the bottom line.
Well, I guess that's what most good politicians do.
Anyway, thank you, Cameron. I now know you're professional advantage over all of us, actually, right here. Thank you, Kimberly Atkins. So many journalists have law degrees. Explain.
I just, I left the law because I didn't like dealing with trial lawyers, but here I am dealing
Great.
with
Well,
trial
glad you
lawyers.
are. Kimberly, thank you. And Sam Stein up next. Michael Avenatti, the lawyer for Stormy Daniels, dropped another bombshell this morning. He says 2 other women may have been paid off in order to keep quiet about their affairs with Donald Trump. This is Avenatti talking, but he's been pretty sharp on this stuff. This is Hardball, where the action is. Welcome back to Hardball. Michael Avenatti has been in Donald Trump's side since he took on the Stormy Daniels case in March. He sued Trump and his lawyer, Michael Cohen, for defamation. He made public a summary of Cohen's confidential banking records, and he helped expose news that Michael Cohen solicited $1 million from the government of Qatar. Well, today he made an explosive new allegation, telling MSNBC that he's nearly done confirming the accounts of 2 women who say they had relations with Donald Trump and were paid to keep quiet. Let's watch him.
In past interviews, you've told us that other women have come to you, have come forward. You said you were vetting them. Are they fully vetted? Is there any more to share?
They are not fully vetted, but there's at least 2 that I think are on solid ground. And I think that as the evidence rolls out over the coming months, disclosures are going to be made that my client was not alone as it relates to these payments, that Michael Cohen was not a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week fixer for the sole purpose of taking care of Stormy Daniels.
2 women who allege that they have agreements with Michael Cohen or Donald Trump?
Correct.
And women who claim to have had affairs or sex with Donald Trump?
Correct.
And these women, are they part of larger payments?
I'm sorry?
Did they have larger payments paid to them, larger than $130,000?
Yes.
Lots of information there, thanks to Mika. This comes a day after President Trump finally acknowledged reimbursing Cohen for the $130,000 hush payment to Stormy Daniels. It was part of a financial disclosure document he had to fill out. For more, I'm joined by Jonathan Allen, NBC News digital reporter. Well, this story is like a fire hydrant. I'm not sure it's as important as the Russian probe. I don't think so, because the consequences of letting the Russians mess with our democracy and have it known worldwide we had a problem because of that, and maybe you got a different result than we were supposed to, is not good for our history. This is a messy sexual-related scandal, not unfamiliar to us in politics who cover it. But now it seems to be growing in numbers, at least. What is the significance of the fact that maybe Avenatti's got something? He has this whole portfolio of women who apparently will have the ability to claim that they, in fact, have the same situations that faced his client, Stormy Daniels.
I mean, that's the right question, Chris, is what is the significance here? I don't think anybody would be surprised to find out that Donald Trump had affairs. We know about his past marital history before he ran for president. Obviously, there have been a lot of allegations of that. And I think he's probably, from a political standpoint, in that dead girl or live boy territory that Edwards talked about. He said the former governor of Louisiana said he couldn't lose unless he was caught with a dead girl or a live boy. I think for Trump, just having had an affair or multiple affairs isn't going to change the calculus with his base. However, what we are seeing with Michael Avenatti is more of the story of the White House of President Trump and his associates unraveling. And what we're seeing from what he's produced, and there may be more of this attached to these women that he says he's vetting and may come out soon. What we're finding out is a lot about Michael Cohen. And we're not the only ones finding out about Michael Cohen. Certainly, Robert Mueller is finding out about Michael Cohen, and he appears to have been not only a fixer in the department of paying off women so that they wouldn't tell their stories, but also somebody who was involved in Donald Trump's business dealings around the world. So those bank records, the things that Michael Avenatti has put out there already, the strings, the threads that are being followed by Robert Mueller, those are things that I think do affect the American public and could have an effect on President Trump's standing both politically and legally.
Let me try this by you. Here, John, let me try this one by you. Suppose Michael Cohen's job was to tidy things up before the election and to go around to whatever situations were still out there that he knew about and had fixed at the time, or knew about, and he said, any one of these parties may have a complaint to make, who may be, looking for the fortune cookie right before the election to make a demand, or they did make a demand. They could have been other people in the same time sequence as Stormy Daniels. In other words, could be seen, the payments to them, as campaign contributions or campaign payments, because they were all made to keep people quiet on the very eve of a presidential election. What then?
Yeah, I mean, that's the 62 million vote question or 65 million vote question.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, what you're getting at is
a string of women had come out right before an election and said they all had affairs with Trump and all of us were paid off. I'm sorry, or they tried to pay us off. I think that would have cost them a few thousand votes, maybe 30 or 40,000 in Pennsylvania, for example, especially in the more conservative areas of the state. You know, the middle part, you know, the T, right. You know, these areas, they're pretty culturally conservative. They don't know guys like Trump. They've heard of Frank Sinatra. They've heard of people in Hollywood who behave like that. But they don't know people like Trump who have all these marriages and all these affairs, reputedly, according to Avenatti now.
Yeah, and certainly during the campaign, the Access Hollywood tape that came out was him talking, him boasting of sexually assaulting women, but it wasn't an action. Here you would have actions, hush payments paid out. You know, the big question on campaign finance, and look, what Donald Trump revealed yesterday in a financial disclosure form is important. He'd said it before publicly, now it's a matter of the record. He reimbursed Michael Cohen for the payments that Michael Cohen was making on his behalf, which suggests that there was a debt to Michael Cohen. And if a prosecutor can tie that to the, as you say, can tie that to a desire to help him in the election, then you're talking about an in-kind contribution that would have had to have been reported to the Federal Election Commission. And by the way, the Federal Election Commission is paralyzed. It doesn't do anything. However, a federal prosecutor could go after people involved in a federal election crime.
Wow, it's an amazing story, and it keeps developing. And rolling disclosure, we finally have the President of the United States admitting he made this payment because he had to fill out the form like other elected officials. Anyway, thank you, Jonathan Allen, for that analysis. Up next, President Trump claims his administration has had the most successful start in history, despite the Russian investigation. But a former member of Trump's cabinet, a very recent member of his cabinet, doesn't seem to agree. He's warning about a crisis in the current government, and he's doing it out loud. You're watching Hardball.
I sat in the Senate Republican lunch with the president 2 days ago, and you heard senator after senator tell this president he is the most successful president in their lifetimes. In 16 months of tax cuts and regulatory reductions and getting to close to making conversations, if not deals, with North Korea and South Korea.
Welcome back to Hardball. That was White House Counselor Kellyanne Conway saying that Senate Republicans have told Trump that he's the most successful president in their lifetimes. Well, today Trump took it a step further. As we mentioned, the president tweeted that despite the disgusting, illegal, and unwarranted witch hunt, we have had the most successful first 17-month administration in U.S. history by far, exclamation point. Sorry to the fake news media and haters, but that's the way it is. Well, Trump is comparing himself to presidents who have made monumental achievements in their first 17 months. FDR launched the New Deal. Truman ended World War II. LBJ passed the Civil Rights Bill. In fact, in contrast, Trump's biggest achievements have been the tax cut bill and his judicial nominations. And while Trump likes to praise himself, not everyone who's worked for him is on the same page. That's up next with the Hardball Roundtable. Welcome back to Hardball. Well, former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, remember him? Made some unexpected comments about Washington in his commencement speech at VMI, the Virginia Military Institute, just yesterday. Let's watch some of it.
As I reflect upon the state of our American democracy, I observe a growing crisis in ethics and integrity. An essential tenet of a free society, a free people, is access to the truth. If our leaders seek to conceal the truth, or we as people become accepting of alternative realities that are no longer grounded in facts, then we as American citizens are on a pathway to relinquishing our freedom.
Let's bring in tonight's Hardball Roundtable. Andy Carney's a White House reporter for Politico. Cornell Belcher's Democratic strategist for everybody, and MSNBC political analyst, and John Brabenner's a Republican strategist. Well, my first comment, well, let me ask you all to go first. What do you make of cabinet secretaries that only speak the truth after they're out the door?
It's what we're seeing from a lot of Republican leaders. It's like the Jeff Flake syndrome. Suddenly, when there's nothing to lose anymore, they speak truth to power. With Tillerson, it's quite rich to hear this from him now when he was the least accessible Secretary of State ever, really he alienated the press corps that didn't travel with him because he wouldn't let them.
He let one reporter, who was, I'm not sure who she was with, Erin McPike, whatever it was. Yeah. He wasn't let the main reporters go around with him ever.
But do you think there's a sense that like for Rex, he didn't speak up or say anything because he wanted to be the adult in the room? That, you know, we talked about early on, we're going to have some adults in the room with Trump, and Rex was one of those, and he didn't want to alienate the president early on because he thought that he could actually keep things under control.
If he pandered to him.
Yeah, but here's what I can't. Everybody keeps reporting.
When has that worked?
But why is everybody reporting that he must have been talking about Trump? He was talking about Washington, and he said leaders, plural. And I think that that's reasonable.
Trump didn't take this personal.
I don't think it was directed personally. I think it was towards Washington. And frankly, I think he's probably even talking about news media and everybody else. I think what he said was an accurate statement about everybody in Washington.
I think that's a stretch to think he wasn't talking about Trump. And I think the guy,
then why didn't he mention his name?
The administration
he didn't have to.
let it be known
because everybody knew he was talking about it.
He was fired while on the toilet. I think he's pretty angry.
Well, then he's a disgruntled employee.
Let's go. You can start this, Bray Benner. You're in the barrel for a minute.
Okay,
one of the greatest presidents in history. In fact, the greatest 17-month presidency ever. Your thoughts?
Well, look, I understand where the president's coming from. This is going to surprise you, but I'm standing up for the president on this one. Here's a guy that turns on the news every night, like most Americans. We hear Russia, we hear FBI, and we hear about porn stars. We don't hear about 3.9% unemployment, the lowest in almost 20 years, the lowest for African Americans and Hispanics in history. We don't hear about ISIS going from 34,000 square miles in Iraq and Syria to decimated. Right. We don't hear about these negotiations will be the most fundamental change in the world if these negotiations with North Korea
we read
work
the
out.
Paper. I mean, every front page, every day practically is North Korea, so I don't buy that.
Well, but they're not saying it in the positive light of what we've already seen with 3 Americans released last week, the stop of the missile program. My point is, if I was this president, I would be awfully frustrated that there's no bandwidth for some of the good news.
In the clip you just played, Kellyanne ticking off accomplishments, she ticked off like peace with North Korea, and that hasn't happened yet. She's counting a win that it looks now like that summit in Singapore is likely not going to happen. So that's not a win yet.
A lot of what they claim as victories, Cornell, are not what most people like killing environmental regulations. Well, Judge Gorsuch, they're not considered big wins for most people.
Well, they're not considered big wins for most Americans. I mean, if you look at sort of what they claim as a real big win is their tax cut, which quite frankly is underwater. Their big victory is.
What do you mean underwater?
Well, more people disapprove of it than approve of it, right? It's almost disillusional. Like you have 80% of Americans from NBC polling say the country is divided, right? You have a majority of Americans right now thinking that America is losing respect, not gaining respect in this across the globe. You have a president who's consistently stuck between 44 and 47% approval. Now he's going to say, he's 47 now, so his numbers are improving. But he has a ceiling on his approval right now. You have more Americans thinking that there's something fundamentally wrong in this country than ever before.
Yeah, but
that's not success.
His numbers are improving. Let's talk about that, number one. Number two, more importantly, right now for the 2018 elections, the generic ballot has tightened significantly.
And what's the generic ballot?
It's pretty much 1 point was by a lot of people this week, and as low as 3 points in other places.
Between 6 points.
And it's lower than that now. Now, wait a minute. Let's go back to the tax cuts. 91% have had an increase in take-home pay. 5 million. Okay,
let's stop. We're not going to do this. We're not
going to do bonus.
I want to make some picks on the wall. Are the Democrats going to win the House this year in November?
Well, I don't think so. I think it's going to be difficult.
Think so.
I will tell you, they
Cornell, you're the pollster. Who's going to win this November?
Well,
the Democrats get the House, the 23 seats they need. They got 3 this week already in Pennsylvania.
Yes, and actually, I'll back this up with facts. If you go back to 2006, you have the same underlying factors there. You have a historically low approving president. You have a Congress with 70% disapproval of Congress, and you have a sense that they want change. The underlying factors here look very much like 2006, and you have more college-educated white women breaking away from Republicans, not because of the economy, but because of their anger at this sort of the culture that they see going on in Washington right now. I know you like to make about the Democrats, but you know very well it's an indictment on the president and what's going on in Washington. Right? Well, Republicans do run Washington, right?
Let me ask you this:
so you're not going to take credit for what's going on in this country?
Are Democrats going to run ads saying they voted against the tax cut?
Some of them will.
Has any yet?
Wait a minute.
what's more beautiful is how many Republicans, we saw Republicans running an ad about tax cuts in Pennsylvania for the special election, but they quickly had to pull it down because you know why? Because it's not working, because most Americans don't feel this tax cut.
No, I've had a lot of candidates already run about this tax cut, and their candidates are already.
I hope you do.
And if Democrats dislike it so much, I don't know why they're not running it.
It's not Democrats.
The roundtable sticking with us. We're going to start with Annie because she hasn't had a chance here. We'll be right back. Tell me something I don't know. Coming up, you're watching Hardball. We're back with the Hardball Roundtable. Annie, tell me something I don't know.
The leakers in the comms department have become the story of the Trump administration this week, and there are staffers there who think that the axe might be coming for them. And the word on the street, the betting game in Washington is, how long will Sarah Sanders last? Will she push on past July, which will be her one-year mark in the job? People think that might be coming.
Communications department's in trouble.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Just a little bit.
Well, we know what they did. You know, he's dying anyway. We should say they're dying anyway.
Black Pact came out a poll of African Americans in battleground states. We talk a lot about the economic metrics and improving. Majority of African Americans think the economy is growing worse, not better. A plurality of them feel as though they're falling behind. It is a very different picture for them economically than what we're seeing in the numbers.
For what group?
African Americans in battlegrounds.
Generally?
Yes.
Economically,
for economics.
Jay Brenner, for John, who's working as candidate for the Senate race in Pennsylvania.
And we're going to talk about Pennsylvania. In all of the early primaries, there's been a lot more Democrat intensity, higher Democrat turnout. That changed in the primary in Pennsylvania this week. There are about 850,000 more Democrats than Republicans in Pennsylvania. Yet on primary day, only about 60,000 more Democrats than Republicans actually showed up. And so the intensity in Pennsylvania was nowhere near for the Democrats what we saw in other states.
Can Barletta, your candidate, win on the immigration issue?
I think it'll be an important issue, yeah, and I think he can. I think in Pennsylvania, the president won Pennsylvania on that issue, so there's no reason you can't win the Senate race.
Benny Carney, thank you. Cornell Belcher and John Bray Bennett, you all in your own way know what you're talking about. When we return, let me finish tonight with Trump Watch. You're watching Hardball. Trump Watch Thursday, May 17th, 2018. The Giuliani-Trump strategy is now out in the open. Worried that Robert Mueller will produce evidence of criminal action by the president and his associates, the plan is to shift the country's attention to another question. Not whether the president has been shown to be guilty or colluded with the Russians or obstructed justice. In fact, nothing on the substance of what Mueller ultimately reports. What Trump and his troubadour and fellow New Yorker Giuliani want the country thinking about is the totally different question of whose side you're on. Are you for the Democrats and Mueller in the deep state, or are you on the side of the man who's taken on those forces of the establishment? This is what Giuliani and Trump are using to pollute the national conversation. Attacks on the FBI, on the Justice Department stormtroopers, they call them. Attacks on the illegitimate Mueller investigation, they call it. I remember this kind of strategy being perpetrated long before, back in October of 1984, in the days after President Ronald Reagan blew his first debate with Democratic challenger Walter Mondale. The Reagan forces were preparing for the worst. And what if Reagan blew his second debate with Mondale? What then? Fearing the worst, Reagan strategist Lee Atwater dreamed up what he called the Great American Fog Machine. If it's clear the president did badly at Red, then it's our job to obscure the result. The Atwater strategy called for two main lines of assault. You can see them today. One, attack the other guy, in this case, Mueller. Two, polarize the country. Force people to decide whose side are you on, the political establishment or Trump's. No matter what Mueller presents, no matter how it incriminates the president and his people, don't forget, they say, it's a battle between them and us. The old Great American Fog Machine is now being wheeled out for use. It's not about the truth it works. It's about standing up for Donald Trump, right or wrong. And that's Hardball for now. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, it's Chris Hayes from MSNBC. You know, every day I come to the office and we make a television show. And every day I think to myself, there's so much more I want to talk about. And so this is our podcast. It's called Why Is This Happening? And the whole idea behind it is to get to the root of the things that we see play out every day. They're driven by big ideas. Each week, I sit down with a person uniquely suited to explain why this is happening.
New episodes of Why Is This Happening? Every Tuesday. Listen for free wherever you get your podcasts.